I'm Emily Parker, and I grew up in a world where love was always conditional. It wasn't about being good to others, being kind, or being vulnerable. It was about the kind of love that fit neatly into a perfect image, an image that never seemed to include me. My parents, Helen and Richard Parker, always made it clear that love in our family was tied to status, wealth, and social standing. They weren't cruel, at least not in the way that would break your heart in obvious ways. Instead, their cruelty was a subtle thing, a critique wrapped in compliments, a dismissal dressed as concern. It was the kind of love that demanded performance, not authenticity. Growing up, I always felt like an actress playing a role in a performance I never signed up for. I wasn't supposed to be me. I was supposed to be the version of me they wanted the world to see. When I was little, I remember my father always checking the scoreboard at my school. If I didn't have straight A's, he would call me into his study and explain to me, in his calm, factual way, how important it was to be perfect in everything. Perfection equals respect, he'd say. And respect opens doors. You need to be worthy of respect, Emily. You're not entitled to it. Those words stayed with me long after I left the house for college. It became ingrained in me that the love I longed for, the approval I sought, would never come unless I achieved something spectacular in their eyes. I worked hard, always. I won every academic competition. I had internships with prestigious companies. I built my resume with accomplishments that were meant to impress, not to fulfill my own dreams. But the thing about conditional love is that no matter how much you achieve, no matter how perfect you make yourself, it's never enough. Because their love was never truly about me. It was about what I could provide, what I could do for them, for their image, for their status. As the years passed, I learned to numb the ache of not being seen. The ache of not being good enough. I had learned to perform, to be the perfect daughter, the perfect student, the perfect employee. And then, one day, when I graduated from college, I was faced with the ultimate test, getting married. This should have been the day that I had always dreamed of, but I felt a tightness in my chest as I thought about it. The wedding was supposed to be my day. My chance to finally prove that I was worthy of love in the way I had always wanted. But I knew deep down that this was going to be another performance, another act in the long drama of my life. Because I was marrying someone who could meet their standards, the right man from the right family, the one who could provide me with the kind of life they approved of. That man was Luke. He was everything my parents had hoped for in a son-in-law. Wealthy, successful, and connected to the right people. I loved him, in my own way, but more than that, I needed him. I needed his validation. I needed his presence to make the people around me, especially my parents, believe that I had finally made it. That I was worthy of their affection, even if it wasn't the kind of love that truly nourished me. I tried to convince myself that Luke was the love I had been waiting for, that he was enough. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't marrying him for love. I was marrying him because I had spent so much of my life trying to fit into someone else's idea of what I should be. Luke was just another chapter in that story. As the wedding day approached, the anxiety mounted. I was no longer the little girl trying to earn my father's praise. No, I was a woman on the verge of making the biggest decision of my life. The one decision that should have been about me, my happiness, my future, my desires, was being shaped by every word my mother had ever said, every expectation my father had set. I remember standing in front of the mirror on the morning of my wedding, my heart racing as I looked at myself in the reflection. I wore a dress that I knew my parents would approve of, a classic, elegant piece, the kind you'd see in any society wedding magazine. I had carefully chosen the right shades of makeup, ensuring my look was flawless. This day was about more than just me. It was about proving something. I tried to calm my nerves, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. What if I didn't measure up? What if this wasn't enough to make them proud? The questions swirled in my mind like a storm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to make a huge mistake. When I walked into the room for the ceremony, I knew all eyes would be on me. But the truth was, I wasn't walking down the aisle to marry the man I loved. I was walking down the aisle to marry the man who would finally make my parents proud, who would finally validate my existence. And then, in the middle of it all, something completely unexpected happened. The day was moving at a pace I could barely keep up with. The delicate hum of the wedding preparations, the flower arrangements, the final touches on my dress, the music rehearsal, all seemed to blur together as I stood frozen, gripping the hem of my gown, fighting against the overwhelming pressure that had been mounting for years. I couldn't deny it, part of me had been waiting for a moment like this. A moment where everything fell into place, where I would finally get to feel like I belonged. The day I walked down the aisle, with all eyes on me, I imagined the admiration, the pride, and the acceptance I had craved for so long. But as the hours ticked by, a different kind of anticipation built within me, one I hadn't expected. The fear of disappointment. From the day I was born, my parents had taught me that love was something you earned, that it was conditional on meeting certain expectations. It was never about affection or understanding. It was about appearances, status, and fitting the mold of what a perfect family should be. The love they showed me, or rather the lack of it, was always tied to my actions, my grades, my achievements, my success in all things they deemed important. Even as a little girl, I remember feeling invisible, watching my parents' smiles widen only when my achievements reflected their values. But the love I yearned for, the kind that spoke of genuine care, was always withheld unless I performed to their standards. And yet, here I was on the brink of the most important day of my life, standing in the ornate bridal suite, desperately trying to convince myself that this was real, that I was truly loved. But the anxiety never stopped building. The pressure to have this perfect, fairy tale wedding, the kind my parents would brag about at every opportunity, was too much. As I stared into the mirror, I wasn't sure who I was trying to please more, my parents or myself. This wedding was supposed to be my day. The day where I finally proved to myself that love wasn't about validation or approval. But the anxiety was getting to me. Every stitch in the fabric of the dress felt heavy, like a reminder of the years spent contorting myself into a version that could fit their image. Emily, my mother's voice came through the door. It was soft, almost too gentle. "Are you ready, darling?" I forced a smile, smoothing the fabric of my gown and inhaling deeply. "Yes, Mom." "Just a minute." As I adjusted the veil, I caught a glimpse of myself in the full-length mirror. For the first time, I saw not just the bride standing in front of the mirror, but the woman who had fought so hard for her place in this world. The woman who had been overlooked, misunderstood, and yet had clawed her way to this moment, against all odds. I glanced at the letter in my hand, the final touch, my declaration to my parents that today, things would be different. I wasn't going to just walk down that aisle as their obedient daughter. I was going to walk down that aisle as someone who had found her own version of happiness, on her own terms. With Luke. Luke. My fiancé, the man who had never questioned my worth. The man who had made me believe that love could be unconditional, something pure and real. When I looked into his eyes, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I was just me, and he loved me for it. It was something I had never felt from my parents. And it terrified me. "Are you sure about this?" I had asked him the night before, in a moment of uncertainty, my fear of the judgment that awaited me too strong to ignore. "Emily," he had said, taking my hand with a reassuring grip. "I know you're scared. But you're going to be the most beautiful bride in that room, and the moment you walk in, you'll see, I'll be there waiting for you, just as I always have. For better or for worse." His words echoed in my mind as I stood there in the bridal suite. I wasn't sure if I was ready, but there was one thing I knew for sure: if my parents didn't see me for who I truly was, at least I had someone who did. That, in itself, was a victory. Let me know your thoughts, and if this section fits the style and emotional depth you're looking for. If it works. As the clock ticked down to the moment I would walk down the aisle, my heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. There was a familiar tension hanging in the air, the same tension that had always existed at family gatherings, especially when my parents were involved. It was a pressure I had learned to live with, the constant feeling of needing to measure up to an invisible, ever-changing standard. Today, though, was different. Today, I was no longer trying to be someone I wasn't. I was ready to be the woman I had fought to become. I heard the familiar hum of the guests settling into their seats, the soft murmur of voices just outside the door. This was it. This was my moment to prove to myself that love didn't need validation from anyone else. As I adjusted my veil one final time, my mind drifted to the years I had spent trying to earn my parents' affection, the countless moments when I had felt overlooked, dismissed. All those years of striving, of sacrificing parts of myself, only to realize that no matter what I did, would never be enough for them. "Emily, it's time," my maid of honor, Lucy, whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She had been with me through every step of this journey, from the moments of self-doubt to the quiet victories. Her presence was a comfort, but even she couldn't quiet the storm of emotions brewing inside me. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a defining moment in my life, one that would change everything. I could feel the cold weight of my mother's expectations heavy on my shoulders. In her eyes, this wedding was just another performance, another opportunity to showcase how perfect our family appeared from the outside. But I wasn't just marrying for appearances. I wasn't marrying Luke because of what others would think or because it was the right thing to do, in my parents' eyes. I was marrying him because I loved him, because he made me feel seen, heard, and understood in a way no one else ever had. I took a deep breath and let the air fill my lungs. The tension in my chest began to ease, just a little, as I remembered something Luke had said to me the night before. "You are enough," he had whispered, cupping my face in his hands. "You have always been enough. And I will spend my life proving that to you." His words were the steady anchor I needed in that moment. As I opened the door to the chapel, the soft murmur of the guests died down. The moment I stepped into the room, all eyes were on me. I felt the weight of their gazes, the judgment, the expectation. But this time, it didn't matter. I wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. I was here to marry the love of my life, and nothing else mattered. My parents sat at the front, their faces fixed in polite smiles. I could already sense the disapproval simmering just below the surface, the silent judgment of my life choices. But I refused to let it take root in my heart. I was no longer a little girl seeking their approval. I was a woman who had found love on her own terms, and I was about to make the most important commitment of my life. As I walked down the aisle, my heart swelled with a mixture of joy and defiance. With each step, I felt stronger, more certain of the decision I had made. And when I finally reached Luke, standing there with his warm smile and his loving gaze, I knew that I had found something worth fighting for. Section 4. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and promises. Luke's words, sincere and full of love, echoed in my mind, each one a reminder that I was finally stepping into a life I had chosen for myself. When the time came to say, "I do," it wasn't just the joining of two lives, it was the declaration that I was done seeking approval from anyone else, especially from the people who had never truly seen me for who I was. As the priest pronounced us husband and wife, a wave of relief washed over me. The moment I had feared, the moment of judgment from my parents and extended family, had come and gone without incident. I hadn't let their expectations dictate my choices. I hadn't let their cold disapproval make me doubt myself. I had walked into that room as the woman I was always meant to be, and I had done it on my own terms. But even with the vows exchanged and the celebration in full swing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The nagging thought in the back of my mind reminded me that this moment, this triumph, wasn't complete without the approval of my parents. I had convinced myself that their acceptance would be the final piece of the puzzle, that their approval would make everything feel whole. But as I looked around the room, I saw Luke's face beaming with pride and love, and I realized something important. I no longer needed their approval. I had already found everything I needed in Luke. His love was the kind I had always dreamed of, the kind I had spent my life searching for. And now, it was mine. I was about to step into a future that was mine to shape, one that was free from the expectations of a family that had never truly seen me for who I was. The love I had always sought, the unconditional acceptance, was here with me now. And it was enough. Section 5. The reception was everything I had hoped for, joyous, lively, and filled with love. Luke and I danced our first dance, lost in the moment, surrounded by friends and family who were genuinely happy for us. But even as the night unfolded with laughter and celebration, my thoughts kept drifting back to my parents. I had always hoped that this day would change things, that it would be the moment when they would finally see me, finally recognize me as an adult capable of making my own choices. But as I stole a glance at my parents across the room, I could see the coldness in their eyes. My mother's smile was tight, her face betraying a mixture of pride and disappointment. My father's gaze was fixed on the floor, his arms crossed in a stance that suggested disapproval. They were here, yes, but it was clear they didn't understand. They didn't understand that this day wasn't about them. It wasn't about fulfilling their expectations or fitting into their perfect image of what a daughter should be. It was about me finding my own path, choosing love over everything else. Luke's hand on my back brought me back to the moment. He leaned in, whispering in my ear, "Are you okay?" I smiled, genuinely this time, and nodded. "I'm perfect." I realized, then, that I no longer needed them to see me. I didn't need their approval. I had Luke's love, and that was enough. I had the future I wanted, and no one, not even my parents, could take that away from me. As the night wore on, the celebration continued without a hitch, the soft clinking of glasses and the hum of cheerful conversations filling the air. It was everything I had envisioned for this day, an event to be remembered, to mark the start of a new chapter in my life. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I hadn't fully confronted the real challenge yet. I had been so focused on the idea of their approval, so absorbed in trying to impress them, that I had forgotten one important thing: I had already proven my worth. Not to them, but to myself. But the unsettling truth lingered in my chest. Despite all the love, despite the celebration around me, there was still an emotional void I hadn't filled. It wasn't that I hadn't achieved everything I set out to do, it was that I was still longing for something from my parents that they could never give me. Unconditional love. True acceptance. I found myself standing on the edge of the dance floor, watching as Luke danced with my younger sister, Claire. Their laughter echoed across the room, and for a brief moment, I envied their easy connection, the way she had never had to work so hard to gain anyone's affection. Claire had always been the perfect daughter, the one who followed the rules, who was always exactly what my parents wanted her to be. In a way, it was easier for her. But it wasn't her fault. It wasn't anyone's fault except mine. For too long, I had allowed their expectations to shape who I was, trying to fit into their mold while ignoring the fact that my heart yearned for something different. I watched them with a bittersweet smile, knowing deep down that my pursuit of their approval had been exhausting. I had done everything right by their standards, and still, it wasn't enough. No amount of achievement, no amount of success, could ever change the cold, indifferent way they viewed me. But standing there, watching Luke laugh with Claire, I realized that I didn't need them anymore. Luke was standing beside me before I even realized he had left the dance floor. His eyes softened as he noticed the shift in my demeanor. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentle, laced with concern. I looked up at him, forcing a smile, though the smile didn't quite reach my eyes. "I'm fine," I said, more to myself than to him. "It's just, everything. I've spent so many years trying to be someone I'm not. Trying to meet their expectations." Luke's hand found mine, his touch warm and grounding. "Emily, you've always been enough. I hope you see that now." I nodded, feeling a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. I don't think I'll ever fully understand why they've treated me this way. But I'm learning to accept that it's not about me. It's about them. And I can't keep trying to change who I am just to fit into their image of what I should be. Luke pulled me closer, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to. You're perfect the way you are. And I'm so proud of you for choosing yourself, for choosing us." I held on to him, letting his words wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. I wasn't defined by their approval or their rejection. I was defined by my own choices, by the love I had found with Luke. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of joy and bittersweet moments. As the final song of the night played, Luke took my hand and led me out to the balcony for a few moments of quiet. The cool evening air was a welcome relief from the heat of the celebration inside. We stood together, watching the stars twinkle above us, our bodies close but our hearts even closer. "I can't believe we're really married," I said, my voice soft with emotion. Luke smiled, brushing a lock of hair from my face. "It's been a long road, hasn't it?" "It really has," I said, letting out a small laugh. "I never imagined this day would feel so complete. So different from what I expected." "I know what you mean," he said, his voice serious now. "You've had a lifetime of feeling like you weren't enough, like you had to prove yourself to others. But now, you found a place where you're loved for exactly who you are. And that's what matters." His words, simple yet profound, struck me deep in my soul. For so long, I had lived my life in pursuit of validation, always trying to win the approval of people who would never truly see me. But now, standing here with Luke, I realized something life-changing. I had finally found a love that was unconditional, a love that didn't come with strings attached. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about fitting into someone else's mold. It was about being exactly who I was, and being loved for it. For the first time in my life, I truly felt like I belonged. I wasn't trying to be anyone else. I wasn't pretending. And the best part? I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel validated. Luke loved me for who I was, and that was all that mattered. The next few weeks after the wedding were a whirlwind of new beginnings. Luke and I settled into our new life as a married couple, and I found myself gradually letting go of the old patterns of seeking validation. I focused on my career, on building our future together, and on nurturing the love that had blossomed so naturally between us. But even as I thrived in these new chapters, the reality of my relationship with my parents lingered in the background. I had learned to accept that they might never understand me, never fully appreciate the choices I had made. And that was okay. I didn't need their approval anymore. What I needed was to focus on the love that I had created, the life I had built with Luke. That was my reality now, and it was enough. Every time I found myself slipping into old habits, second-guessing my decisions, wondering if they would be proud of me, I reminded myself of the vows I had made to myself on my wedding day. I had promised that I would never again let their judgment shape my decisions. I would always choose what was best for me, what made me truly happy. And as the weeks turned into months, I could see the changes within myself. I felt more confident, more self-assured. I no longer sought the approval I had once craved. I had found my own worth, my own validation, and it didn't come from anyone else. It came from me. Section 9. Months passed, and life continued on its new, exciting path. Luke and I took vacations together, moved into a cozy home in the suburbs, and built a life that was filled with laughter and warmth. We had our share of challenges, as every couple does, but we faced them together, united, supportive, and strong. But as the holidays rolled around, I found myself dreading the inevitable invitation to the family dinner. I had not seen my parents since the wedding, and the thought of facing them again brought up all the old feelings of inadequacy, of wanting to be seen, of wanting to be accepted. Would they even acknowledge me? Or would they still treat me like I was invisible? I found myself standing in front of the mirror again, just as I had on my wedding day. This time, however, there was a new sense of strength within me. I wasn't the same woman who had walked down the aisle just months ago. I had changed. I had grown. And I was no longer looking for their approval. I was going to this dinner for me, not for them. And if they didn't see me, that was their loss. Section 10. When we arrived at my parents' house for the dinner, I felt a strange sense of calm. It wasn't the nervous energy that used to overwhelm me before every family gathering. It was a quiet confidence, an assurance that no matter what happened, I was okay. I didn't need them to validate my choices, my life, or my worth. I had already found everything I needed in Luke and in myself. The evening unfolded predictably. My parents were polite, distant, but I could sense their discomfort with the new version of me. The one who no longer cared about their judgment. But instead of feeling hurt, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I had finally arrived at the place I had always longed for, the place where my own happiness mattered more than anyone else's opinion. And as the night drew to a close, Luke and I left the house hand in hand, smiling at each other. It wasn't about the approval I once sought. It was about the love we had built, the life we had chosen, and the future we were going to create together. I had finally found the freedom I had been searching for, the freedom to live my life on my own terms. As the days passed after that holiday dinner, I began to feel a sense of peace I had never known before. It was as if the weight that had burdened me for so long had finally been lifted. The constant need for approval, the endless striving for validation, it had all melted away. In its place was a quiet confidence, a new belief in myself that I had never thought possible. Luke noticed the change in me almost immediately. There was a new lightness in my step, a new joy in the way I interacted with the world. I had always been driven, always been the one pushing myself to achieve, to succeed, to prove that I was worthy. But now, I realized that my worth wasn't something I had to prove to anyone. It was inherent. It was mine to define. The realization was liberating. I no longer had to keep up with the facade of perfection, the constant performances I had put on for my parents, for the world. I was enough as I was. I didn't need anyone to tell me that anymore. Luke and I spent more time together than ever before, traveling to places we'd always wanted to visit. We found ourselves in new cities, exploring new cultures, and living life in a way that felt free from the expectations that had once shaped my every move. The more time I spent with Luke, the more I realized that this was what true love was meant to be, supportive, freeing, and unconditional. It was in these moments, far from the pressures of my family, that I began to understand the value of true partnership. It wasn't about approval. It wasn't about validation. It was about two people choosing each other, supporting each other, and growing together. And that, in itself, was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. In the months that followed, I found myself making different decisions, ones that were more aligned with who I was and what I wanted out of life. I stopped second-guessing my choices. I didn't feel the need to explain myself anymore. If something felt right, I pursued it without hesitation. If something felt wrong, I walked away without guilt. My life, my choices, were now mine to make. At work, my confidence grew as well. I found myself taking on new challenges, stepping into leadership roles, and making decisions with a calm assurance that had once seemed out of reach. My colleagues noticed the change in me, too. I was more vocal, more assertive, and more present than I had ever been. It was like a switch had been flipped, and the quiet woman who had once walked through life trying to please everyone was replaced by someone who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted. And then there were the moments with Luke. Our relationship blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. We talked more openly, sharing our dreams, our fears, and our hopes for the future. We worked together, not as two individuals trying to survive their own lives, but as a team, building something far greater than I had ever imagined. Every day with him felt like a new adventure, a shared journey where we both brought our own unique strengths to the table. But even as I reveled in this newfound peace, I couldn't help but wonder about my parents. Was this the final break? Was there any chance for reconciliation? I found myself asking the question more and more. I had chosen to distance myself from them for my own well-being, but did that mean I would never get the relationship I had always wanted? The relationship that, deep down, I had always craved. One evening, as I was curled up on the couch with Luke, my phone buzzed. I picked it up to see a text from my mother. It was short, direct, and to the point. We need to talk. My heart skipped a beat. After all this time, after all the emotional distance, my parents were reaching out. I wasn't sure whether to be excited or afraid. What did this mean? Did they want to apologize? Did they finally see me? I showed Luke the text, and he simply nodded. Whatever happens, you've already done the hardest part. You've chosen yourself. And that's all that matters. His words were a comfort, but still, a part of me couldn't shake the old doubts. What if they tried to manipulate me again? What if this was another attempt to control my life, to tell me that I wasn't enough? But this time felt different. It felt like a genuine attempt to repair something that had been broken for far too long. So, I replied, when and where? We arranged to meet at a small cafe the following afternoon. I had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that first family dinner. I wasn't the same person who had desperately sought their approval. The following afternoon, I arrived at the cafe early, my mind racing with questions and emotions. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, or even what I was expecting. All I knew was that I had reached a point in my life where I could face whatever was coming with a calm that I hadn't felt before. I had Luke by my side, and I had a new sense of self-worth that was unwavering. When my parents arrived, I could see that they were nervous, too. They sat down across from me, and for a moment, none of us spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with years of unspoken words and unresolved tensions. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "Emily," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "I know we've hurt you. I know that we've failed you in ways we can never take back. But I want you to know that we're sorry. I'm sorry. Your father's sorry. We didn't understand then, but we understand now." The words, though long overdue, hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I had spent so many years trying to make them see me, trying to make them understand, and here they were, finally acknowledging the pain they had caused. I could feel the wall around my heart starting to crumble, piece by piece. But even as I felt a glimmer of hope, I knew I couldn't go back to what we had before. I couldn't erase the years of emotional neglect, the years of trying to fit into their perfect mold. But for the first time, I felt a shift, an acceptance that I had done everything I could. And now, it was time for them to do their part. Section 15. "You're right," I said softly, my voice calm but firm. "You've hurt me. I can't change that, and neither can you. But what I can change is how I move forward. I've built my own life, my own sense of self-worth, and it's no longer tied to your approval." I watched their faces as my words sank in. My mother's eyes were filled with tears, while my father, usually so composed, looked almost vulnerable. The fact that they were here, acknowledging the hurt they had caused, was something I had never thought possible. "I love you both," I continued, my voice unwavering. "But I can't keep living my life for you. I can't keep trying to prove that I'm worthy of love. I've already found it. In Luke, in myself, and in the life I've built. And that has to be enough." There was a long silence after I spoke. I wasn't sure what they would say next, or if they would even understand. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had chosen myself. And that was all I needed. My father finally spoke, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to give you what you need, Emily. But I want you to know that I'm proud of you. I see you now." It wasn't the grand apology I had always dreamed of. It wasn't the perfect closure I had imagined. But in that moment, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the start of something new. The next few months were filled with a sense of calm I hadn't anticipated. My relationship with my parents didn't return to what it had once been, but it shifted into something new, something more honest. They had acknowledged their shortcomings, and I had taken the first step in healing. Our conversations were less about the past and more about the present, about the lives we had all built, the changes we had all made. But even as we moved forward, I realized that I had changed, too. I was no longer the woman who would have done anything to earn their approval. I was now a woman who loved herself enough to walk away when it wasn't healthy, to choose a life that was truly hers. Luke and I continued to build our future together, hand in hand. We explored new opportunities, traveled to new places, and created memories that were ours alone. And as we did, I knew that I was exactly where I was meant to be, on a path that was uniquely mine, shaped by my own choices and the love I had found within myself. Section 17. Years later, I looked back on my wedding day and realized that it had been more than just the start of a new chapter. It had been the moment I finally let go of the past, of the need to please my parents, of the pursuit of validation that had consumed so much of my life. Luke and I had built something beautiful, something unshakable. Our love was rooted in mutual respect, in understanding, and in the freedom to be exactly who we were. We had built a life together, one that was filled with joy, laughter, and adventure. And as I stood there, looking at the life we had created, I realized that this was what true love was all about. It wasn't about approval or validation. It wasn't about conforming to someone else's expectations. It was about finding someone who loved you for who you were, and being brave enough to love yourself in return. As Luke and I continued building our life together, we began to think more about the future, the kind of legacy we wanted to leave behind. It wasn't about material success or wealth. Those things had always been part of the equation, but they no longer defined us. What mattered most was the love we had for each other, and the way we nurtured and respected each other's individual journeys. We found ourselves talking more about our hopes and dreams, not just for our relationship, but for the world we wanted to impact. Both of us had been so focused on external validation for most of our lives, but now we wanted to build something meaningful, something that wasn't based on anyone else's approval or expectations. The conversations we had were no longer about who had achieved what or how we could impress others. Instead, they centered around how we could make a difference. It was liberating to realize that we were finally in control of our own narrative. We were no longer living for others, but for ourselves. As we traveled and volunteered together, I noticed how the way I interacted with the world had shifted. I no longer felt the need to prove myself, to make a mark just for the sake of recognition. I was content with the quiet moments, the time spent nurturing the life Luke and I were creating together. It was simple, but it was real. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. Section 19. With every passing day, I began to fully embrace the life that I had fought so hard to create. I no longer felt the need to compare myself to anyone else. I had stopped asking for permission to be who I was. And most importantly, I had learned to stop seeking validation from the people who had never truly seen me for who I was. That doesn't mean it was easy, though. I still had moments of doubt, moments when old fears crept up and made me question whether I was really on the right path. It wasn't always smooth sailing. There were still conversations with my parents that were difficult, where the old patterns tried to resurface. But each time, I stood firm in the truth that I had learned to embrace. I didn't need them to see my worth anymore. I knew it for myself. Luke was always there, grounding me, supporting me, encouraging me to keep going. His love wasn't conditional. It wasn't tied to some idealized version of who I should be. He loved me for exactly who I was. And that, more than anything, made me realize how far I had come. We'd started a life together, free from the chains of family expectations and societal pressures. And as we talked more about the future, I realized that the only thing I truly wanted was to continue living authentically. The world outside could change, but the strength of our connection was built on a foundation of trust, love, and mutual respect. Section 20. One day, while Luke and I were sitting in the kitchen, talking about our plans for the next year, something clicked. I finally understood what my wedding day had meant. It wasn't just a symbolic beginning, it was the moment I had finally decided to step into my own power. I wasn't waiting for anyone else's approval anymore. I wasn't trying to fit into anyone else's mold. It was then that I realized how much I had grown. The woman who had once walked into that family dinner, hoping for validation, was no longer the woman sitting across from Luke. She had evolved, learned to let go of the past, and chosen to prioritize her own happiness and peace. Looking back on it all, I could see how far I had come, how much had changed. The person I had been was no longer someone I recognized, but in the best way possible. I had let go of the need for approval, for acceptance. I had learned to accept myself. I had learned to embrace the love I deserved. Luke and I spoke about our next steps, our future together. And for the first time, I realized that I was living a life on my own terms. Our journey together was just beginning, and it was one I knew we would navigate side by side. No longer was I caught in the trap of trying to meet expectations. I was living authentically and truly at peace with who I had become. The more time I spent reflecting, the more I began to realize that there was a whole world out there, beyond the confines of my family's approval. There was a world full of opportunities, adventures, and moments that I could truly claim as my own. One of the greatest lessons I had learned on this journey was the power of letting go. Letting go of the need to please my parents. Letting go of the fear that I wasn't good enough. Letting go of the toxic need for validation. It was only through this release that I was able to step into the freedom that comes with truly living life for yourself. And while I had walked away from the past, I had also gained something in return. A new sense of self-worth. A sense that I wasn't defined by my family's opinions or the expectations of the world. I was defined by who I was becoming, someone strong, confident, and capable of creating her own happiness. In the midst of this realization, I also found that I wasn't alone. Luke was there, always by my side, a constant source of love and support. Together, we had built a life that was full of promise and possibility, one that we had shaped together without fear of judgment or comparison. Section 22. A few months later, as Luke and I stood on a hill overlooking the ocean, something profound happened. He turned to me and said, "I don't need to ask you to be anyone other than who you are. I love you for exactly who you are." His words, simple yet powerful, were the affirmation I had longed for my whole life. But this time, it wasn't about seeking approval. It was about two people recognizing each other's worth and choosing to stand beside one another through everything life would throw at us. It wasn't the validation I had once craved from my parents, but it was the type of love I had always dreamed of, love that was based on mutual respect, understanding, and acceptance. And that was enough. More than enough. As we held hands, watching the sun set over the horizon, I realized that love wasn't about perfection or fitting into someone else's idea of who I should be. It was about being seen, being accepted, and being loved for who you truly were. And I had finally found that. Section 23. Our lives continued to evolve in the most beautiful ways. The life that Luke and I had built was a testament to the power of self-acceptance and love. There were still moments of doubt, still moments when the shadows of the past tried to creep back in, but each time I found myself facing those doubts, I met them with the unwavering belief that I was enough. I didn't need anyone else's validation. I had Luke, and I had myself, and that was more than enough. We eventually moved into our own home, a place that was all ours, filled with memories we had created together. The house became a symbol of everything we had achieved as a couple, as individuals, and as people who had learned to embrace who they were. Section 24. As time went on, I began to truly understand the power of letting go. Letting go of expectations, letting go of the pressure to fit into someone else's idea of success. It was in this space of release that I found my true strength. I no longer defined myself by what my parents thought of me or by the life they wanted for me. I defined myself by who I was becoming and the choices I was making for myself. I no longer needed to explain myself to anyone. I had found my worth, my voice, and my place in the world. And as I looked at the life Luke and I had created together, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in my life, I was living the life I had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, authenticity, and purpose. Looking back on that wedding day, I realized that it was never just about the ceremony or the promises made in front of our families. It was about the personal transformation I had gone through. As Luke and I continue our journey together, I know that I'm no longer the person I once was. I'm stronger, more self-assured, and at peace with who I am. The past no longer defines me, and the future is filled with endless possibilities. In the end, the greatest love story is the one you have with yourself. And with Luke by my side, I know that no matter what the future holds, we'll face it together, stronger and more in love than ever before.